Good evening. So this is my least favourite part of the video, where we wait for a few people to get going and it's just saying hi to a few people. Evening Matt. Evening Phoebe. Evening Maynard. Evening Leslie. Very good. So this week, everything happens for a Riesling. If you know me, you know I absolutely adore a pun, and squeezing a grape variety into a pun is just brilliant for me. Freddie, it's gone this week. I've been brave. I've taken it off. So this evening we're tasting three different examples of Riesling. One from Germany, which is the Dr. Lawson Red Slate Dry Riesling. The Devil's Corner Riesling from Tasmania. And the Casas del Bosque Late Harvest Riesling from Casablanca in Chile. So I'll just pop a photo of those up for those who were yet to join. When I give a little bit of background about Riesling. So this evening we're going to be joined by Ernie Lawson, and Ernie Lawson, winemaker in the Mosel in Germany. If there was a grape variety Olympics and they were looking for a flag bearer for Riesling, there would be no better person than Ernie Lawson. So incredibly exciting to have him on this evening to chat through one of his wines. We're also going to be joined by Maynard Blum, who is a Dutch winemaker living in Chile, making some fantastic Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noirs, and this late harvest Riesling. So Riesling is a grape variety found predominantly in Germany. It's the number one country for area of planting, and probably, I would say almost definitely, the number one country for quality Rieslings. And so even more exciting to have Ernie on and taste through one of his wines. So before we get started, I think we'll pour ourselves a glass of the Red Slate Dry Riesling. And as before, while we're tasting along, it's great to see comments, what you're tasting, what you're smelling. And so stick some comments in, tell us what you're tasting, what you're thinking along at home. For those of you who haven't watched, I've always sort of suggested, if you're struggling to find flavours and stuff in the wine, if you scroll along to the fruit emoji section, the fruits in your emojis, you can just have a little pick and see what might trigger your mind. So you might think, oh, I can smell a bit of apple, or there's only so many limes and lemons, however, that you might be able to find. They don't sort of divulge into elderflower, which we might be looking at a couple of these wines. So Riesling is a great variety. It's incredibly versatile. It ranges from wines that are bone dry and sparkling, all the way through to lusciously sweet, as we'll come on to a bit later. But you can find it everywhere in the middle. The other great thing about Riesling is it shows its sense of place better than any other, certainly white grape variety you find anywhere in the world. So it's why you see a lot of wines that are labelled with their terroir, labelled with the soil that it's grown on. So before we really get into this first wine, I think we should bring in Ernie. Say good evening to Ernie. Here he is. So, as I said, if you're popping comments or emojis in, it'd be lovely to hear what you're thinking. Evening, Ernie.
Hey, how you doing? You
very well, me? Yourself?
Yeah, very good. Very good. You see me? You hear me?
Yeah, we're all good. You're
all good. All good. Great.
So, have you been doing many live tastings recently, or tasting wine?
It's the third today. In the afternoon at 3, I did one with Finland. Then at 6 o'clock with San Francisco, and finishing with the UK.
The UK, brilliant. Great Britain, yeah.
Great Britain.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you join and taste through with everyone at home. So tell us a little bit about the Mosel. For me, it's one of the most stunning wine regions in the world, but not only for the sense of place and the stunning scenery, but also for its wines.
Well, I mean, first, it's a beautiful area. You know, it's so, I mean, it's so compact. It's a narrow valley. You look into the steep slopes, you see the river. You know, the Rhine River is much broader, also very beautiful. But in the Mosel with the steep slopes, everything is so narrow. You see the whole landscape at once, you know. And it's I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, you know. Sadly, not that many people know it, you know. I mean, we all know that Burgundy is also nice, but people should come and do a visit in the Mosel. They will be amazed about the beauty there, you know, of the vineyards and
So these are just a couple of
know?
photos I took on my last trip.
Yes, it's stunning. And
Incredibly steep vineyards.
Yes.
Yeah, incredibly steep and all south facing in the best spots.
And great hiking. If people like hiking, they're great hikes, you know, in the Mosel, you know, absolutely beautiful, you know. Yeah. And now you can even hike. I just bought 6 weeks ago the steepest vineyard of the world, basically, you know, 128% steepness.
Wow. So where is that on this? Would it be on here? Is that?
No, it's a little bit. No, it's about half an hour towards, I mean, to the Rhine, you know. It's in Prem. It's called Calmont. It's a very old, it's already planted by the Romans, Caldos Mondos. That is the hot hill, you know, the hot mountain, and it is amazing. And they have a hike in this vineyard, you know. There's the most amazing hike, you know. You have to climb along cliffs, you know. It's amazing, you know. So we are very excited, you know, I mean, I never saw my vineyard manager and my winemaker being quiet for 20 minutes. I took them to the vineyard and said, look, what do you think here? You know, they're climbing through it and no word, silence. And after 20 minutes, my winemaker said, Ernie, are you sure you want to buy this? You know? I said, well, why not?
And this wasn't even the guys who have to pick the grapes. The workers having to carry 60 kilograms of grapes on their backs.
Yeah, so from that point of view, there are some spectacular spots, you know. You don't see this anywhere in the world. I mean, vineyard sites, so extreme, that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. I mean, from that point of view, there are a few. But then we have also, I mean, the other good thing is that these vineyards also produce great wines, you know. And that's since 200 years, you know, it's a family business. And since 200 years, we're producing Riesling here in these steep slopes, you know. Sounds a little bit boring to do the same thing for 200 years, you know. But, you know, but on the other hand, it's in the middle of fucking nowhere. You know what you want to do, there's nothing else to do. But
so, I mean, tell us a little bit about the red slate. Why would you put red slate on the label?
Yeah, because the red slate, as the label already said, it comes from red slate soil, because that's all about this area. This area is all slate soil, you know. The slate soil here is basically blue slate and red slate. And we have different vineyards where we have only red slate and some vineyards where we have only blue slate. And this is basically the grapes from vineyards, which the French would call village and premier cru, because we put only a vineyard name on a Dr. Lawson label if this vineyard is Grand Cru rated, you know, first growth rated.
Sure.
The vineyard is first growth rated, Grand Cru rated, then we put the vineyard name on it. All the other vineyards, which are only second growth and third growth rated, so what the French would call Premier Cru and Village, we don't use the vineyard name because we all know German language is too difficult for most of the people. I mean, you know, I know this story from the first importer, you know, Nigel. When I met him 25 years ago, he said, Ernst, can you tell me, how should we poor English people understand a German label which says Schloss Böckelheimer Kupfergrube Riesling Trockenbeeren aus Lese? You know? I said, Nigel, you're brilliant. Right. That's very difficult, you know? And so I said, I limit the vineyard names, which are sometimes difficult to spell, only to Grand Cru vineyards. So they know if they have a Dr. Lawson label and they see a vineyard they cannot see, at least say, I don't understand it, I can't read it, but I can tell you this is a Grand Cru vineyard. And all the other vineyards, I call it only Dr. Lawson, you know, but name it after the soil type where it was harvested. And this is from Village and Premier Cru vineyards, which all have red slate soil. And it is
so a lot of
made
people
in a very...
might be thinking, sorry, I was just saying, a lot of people at home might be thinking, but so what? What does red slate give to the wine that blue slate doesn't, or vice versa?
Well,
What is the
that's
main
true. There
flavor
is a difference.
characteristic?
It's both slate, sounds pretty much the same. It's also from the same time, Devonian time. I mean, long time ago, 400 million years, you know. But it seems, as you said in the introduction, Riesling is a grape variety which reacts, which shows the soil, you know, which is possibly no other white grape variety is so, I mean, gives such a definition, you know, reacts to the soil where it's grown on, you know. And even that it is from the same time, the red slate and the blue slate, you know. But what we see in the blue slate, we see kind of more, so kind of, you know, stone fruit aroma, like a green apple, white peach, you know. It's a little bit more round, a little bit more charming, a little bit more, you know. I like to compare wines, you know, my wines with people, you know. So blue slate is possibly more like a ballerina, you know, and red slate is more red berry fruit, often, you know, like cassis, you know, or black or red currant, you know, berry fruit, you know, and the acidity is a little bit more minerally driven, a little bit more nerves, you know. It's more like a mountain climber, you know. No,
Rocky.
It's different, but
Oh, we might have lost him for 2 seconds. So, Freddie, a balance of peach and minerality. That is exactly what I get on the tongue. I don't know if anyone else has lost Ernie or whether that's just me. Hopefully it's not my internet going down. If anyone could comment to say if Ernie is... I'll carry on talking. So for me, the red slate... Ernie left. Let's see if I can bring him back in again. So red slate is, as Ernie was saying, it's got this much more nervy tension. And for me, that real peachy, stone fruit, almost herbaceous minerality, also very, very, for me, certainly that white peach.
Sorry.
That's all right.
My dog ran me over. He just came home. You know? He jumped basically on the table, you know, and crashed everything, you know. She is a wild bunch, you know. So a Spanish lady.
Yeah, I'm sure people would like to see her if get her involved if she's still about.
Well, it's too dangerous, you know. And I think what also very special with this dry wine, I think we should point it out, is this wine, these dry wines, all dry wines are made in a very kind of traditional, nearly historic way of winemaking. It's exactly made as my great-grandfather 120 years ago made wine, you know, dry wines, you know. They're all indigenous yeast fermented, you know. They're all fermented in these traditional fruiter casks, you know. And then after fermentation, we sulfur, top it up, and then the wine stays for 12 months in the barrel on the full yeast, so we don't wreck. We leave it on the full yeast, don't wreck it, so the yeast can give it a little bit more, you know, texture, but we don't do batonnage, we don't stir the yeast.
No.
But that makes it, I mean, it gives it a little bit more complexity. This old winemaking, you know, my grandfather kept the wines even 2 to 8 years in the barrel on the full yeast, no? You know, this whole winemaking integrates the acidity very nicely into the complexity, you know, the micro-oxidation through the stave, the yeast in the barrel, that integrates the acidity, and Riesling has high acidity, very beautifully into the whole complexity of the wine. It makes the wine more complex, you know, and I mean, you know.
It's very much a textural thing, isn't it? For me, it's that fantastic palate coating texture. It's like getting a furry nectarine peach skin kind of feel, which I love.
And this old winemaking, as it was done in these days, you know, that gives a lot of texture and, you know, and mouth feel, you know, and with the wine, you know, great wines. I mean, with all kind of European cuisine, you know, I mean, Mediterranean cuisine. I mean, I always say these dry Riesling you can drink with everything you usually would use a Chablis or whatever, or a Sancerre with, you know. It is the same kind of character of wine, which you can easily have with fish and seafood, you know, or Mediterranean grilled barbecued fish, you know, with a little bit of lemon, garlic, oil, parsley, you know.
So why is Riesling so good at being grown in that? Why is the Mosel such a great place? Why is Riesling so suited to the Mosel? Is it because
I think it is a whole combination of things, you know. It is not only one or the other thing. It is first, the Mosel is the most northern growing wine region in this size, you know, historically. Yeah. We all know there's also wine growing in England now, even in south of Sweden. But historically, it was always the most northern growing wine region in this size, you know. So that means it gives it a little bit cooler climate, you know. Then you have the soil. The Slate soil is very unique, especially for Riesling. It makes elegant wines with a lot of finesse. It does never produce big, rich, you know, full-bodied, you know, wines which punch you in the face, you know. And so it is elegant, finesse, lighter in style. I mean, so it is also never overripe, you know. Even the dry wines, they're never more than 12.5 potential alcohol, you know, or alcohol, you know. Yeah. And this is internationally, if you look into the New World or wherever, even white wines can be easily nowadays 14 to 14.5 alcohol. I mean, it's not a criticism, you know. It is the difference that we have, you know. We are rather, this is more wines in the, say, in the more kind of, more old-fashioned style, you know. I mean, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even Bordeaux and Burgundies had been only 12.5% alcohol, you know. And so, they have ageability then, you know. So I think as people who like a little bit, you know, who like complex wines, you know, with not too much alcohol, you know, so only 12.5. I think this is the ideal wine. And it shows everything from the soil. It gives this raciness, this beautiful, this whole complexity from the slate, which really, I mean, transfers into the wine, you know. It makes it very special because it's a special soil. I think slate is something, even with other grape varieties, you feel the slate in the wine, you know. The slate is so, I mean,
that's a very big topic now, isn't it? Yeah. Minerality.
Yeah. I don't want to hear the amber. You know, I was once on a convention in Australia about Riesling, and it was Jancis Robinson was on the panel, and the first thing she said, "In the next 3 days, I don't want to hear the amber."
Talking of New World wineries, you make a little bit of Riesling with some friends in Washington and yes, Clare as well.
I mean, this kind of, you know, I become really a missionary, you know. I mean, going out there and try to do this historic style of dry winemaking, you know. I started it with these people from Chateau Saint Michel in Washington State, where we do also now a GG style of dry Riesling. Keeping it 1 to 2 years in a barrel, There's a larger barrel, 5,000. Yeah, it's called, typical American, they always shorten things, XLC it's called, you know. And then I said, what does XLC means, you know? It's called Eroica, the brand, Eroica XLC. I said, what is extended lease contact?
Oh. That's so American.
Yeah,
giving
it's so
it
American,
some kind of like acronym to just make it really fashionable.
And there we do, I mean, it's quite interesting, very interesting. Then I do a Riesling together with the Barry family, Jim Barry in Australia, you know.
Yeah,
so
Australia,
4 years ago, I said to the two boys, you know, of Peter Barry, from Jim Barry, I said, I would love to do a Riesling Australia. And I would love to do it in the same style as my great-grandfather did it here in the Mosel 120 years ago. And they said, yeah, well, let's do something together, you know. And so I sent them over barrels from Germany, you know, because I thought it's very important to have to do it in barrels, you know, in the old historic style. And so we did indigenous yeast fermentation in these old barrels, which I sent over, you know, and also let it keep their 1-2 years in the barrel, you know. We call it Walter, you know. The place is the Aborigine name of the vineyard. The vineyard, the place where the vineyard is called by the Aborigines Walter. So it's called Walter. And so it's an amazing. We just released 17. It's absolutely gorgeous and amazing what this old historic winemaking. You know, in Australia, often the Riesling is very lime driven. You know, very dry.
We're about to taste the next one we're about to taste is a
here we are.
Tasmanian Riesling.
Yes, you see.
Yeah, so we'll
we
get
did
onto that once you're gone.
and then we do the same Riesling, when we do a Riesling also in this historic style, send barrels from Germany over. I should become a barrel merchant, you know. and so to
what does
winery in Oregon, we do an Appassionata, also GG style, you know, also a year in the barrel, you know, because we have the oldest Riesling vineyard we grow in Oregon, you know, from 76 planted, you know. So I mean, that's Oregon is a young wine growing area. But so we do it everywhere in the world, because for me, it's interesting to find out how much does this old historic winemaking, you know, influence the style, you know, of the wine. And I must say that the wines get really much more complex, this historic winemaking, what these people did 120 years ago. It's amazing. It's they knew what they did, you know.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, I think, before we can move on to the next.
Yeah.
I've just seen some really good ones pop up. So there's two. I'll start with the first one. Someone's just said, what is a GG wine? What do we mean by Grosses Gewächs?
GG means Grosses Gewächs. Grosses Gewächs in German, a horrible name, you know. Sounds very Prussian. Grosses Gewächs, you know.
Grauburgunder.
So Grosses Gewächs is basically the German translation of Grand Cru, because Grand Cru is a French trademark, sure, that is not allowed to use, but we are allowed to use the German direct German translation of Grand Cru. So if you see a GG on the label or on the bottle, means this vineyard on this bottle, on this label, is a Grand Cru vineyard. GG means basically Grand Cru, and it means also it's a dry wine from a Grand Cru vineyard. It means always, GG is always a dry wine from a Grand Cru vineyard. So it's a logo for Grand Cru, and it's always dry.
So this is a question that I've heard you talk about before. Why does Riesling often smell like gasoline?
Well, it is.
I've heard you talk about this before, about hang time.
We talk about. I mean, you can also.
And we're not talking about Michael Jordan hang time. We're talking about grapes standing on the vine for as long as possible.
Or you know, well, I mean, you always call. I mean, you can also call it petrol aromas. That's true. Yeah. It is quite typical for Riesling. There's certain ingredients with Riesling, or in the Riesling grapes, which can turn into petroly aromas, but it depends on the as you said, hang time. You know, if you harvest the Riesling too early, then it can, or it was a very hot vintage that the grapes had been going overripe too early, then you get these petroly aromas. So you have it much more often with the New World, where you have a much warmer climate or heat, as we have it in the Old World. Here, I would say we got it only in the very hot vintages, like 76 was such a vintage, you know, where we get petrol aromas, you know. But I would say once in 20 years, you know. But usually, because we have such a long hang time, we harvest so late in comparison to all the others, you know, that we barely never get petrol aromas, you know. Petroly aromas is 100% related to the hang time and the heat accumulation during the vintage, you know. As hotter the vintage, as more the risk of petrol.
So you say risk, would you call it a fault?
Well, I mean, if it is too much, I don't like it, say it that way. I know that people like it, but if it is too much, I think it's I don't like it so much, you know. And that's the reason also in the New World, where we do Riesling in Washington State, we try to extend the hang time. You know, there's a lot of ways to extend the hang time. So in Washington State, which when I started there 20 years ago, the wines immediately the next year had a lot of petrol aromas, you know. But now we have been able, through viticultural influence, lots of viticultural tricks, you know, to extend the hang time by 2-3 weeks more, you know.
Wow.
And now it's over.
Take all the leaves away.
Gone, you know, gone.
Yeah, brilliant. Just one. Someone says, "What is the lees?" Lees are the dead yeast. Once the yeast has started fermenting the juice, the dead yeast sit to the bottom of the tank, and that's that they're the lees. Yeah.
The yeast produce the alcohol. Very important. The yeast are extremely
exactly
important. They turn the sugar into alcohol in the wine.
Possibly the most important part, other than the grapes.
Most important thing with the whole winemaking. Without yeast, no alcohol. You know. And who want to drink grape juice? No.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you
we're
very
going to
much.
move on to the Tasmania, but great chatting. Thank you so much. We'll chat soon. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Wow, what a treat having Ernie chatting through one of his wines and a bit about the estate. He is really probably the world's best ambassador for Riesling. So moving on to the sorry, I just saw someone said a lot of people were mentioning that the last wine smelt of wet rain on pebbles, and it's amazing. There's actually a technical name for that, which is called petrichor, which is that rain on fresh stone smell that you get, which is certainly I get that exact same aroma in that wine. So moving on to the Devil's Corner Riesling. So this winery has a little sort of special place in my heart. It's where I first went and worked and made wine, did a vintage, did night shifts, tending to Pinot Noir ferments. And actually it was the worst vintage they'd had almost ever, I think. It was in 2011. And it rained for the entire time, and there was very little healthy fruit bought off the vineyards into the winery. So I didn't get to do much other than make sparkling wine and Riesling, in fact. So few ferments of Pinot Noir. So Devil's Corner. So this is made in Tasmania in Australia. So in Germany, we're at about 49 degrees latitude. In Tasmania, was it minus 41 to 42 degrees latitude. So slightly warmer, but has a fantastic cooling effect from the Antarctic and the currents that come off the Antarctic. And some of the most pure air and pure water ends up in Tasmania, because there is nothing between the Antarctic and Tasmania, so no pollution whatsoever. So fantastic place for food, seafood, and wine. So 2 or 3 main wine growing areas in Tasmania. Have the north, which is the Tamar Valley, the east, which is where Devil's Corner vineyard winery is, and then the south around Hobart. But grapes for this wine come from the north in the Tamar Valley, which is a little bit cooler, despite the fact that it being a bit north. It's got a little bit more exposure to these cooling currents, also a little bit more rainfall, whereas eastern Tasmania has a rain shadow preventing it, so it's a little bit drier, produces a little bit more warmer, riper fruit. But for the Devil's Corner, there you get fruit from both, so that they balance both that sort of riper lime cordial fruit you might get from the east coast, as well as the more austere pithiness that you get from the north of Tasmania. So I get talking of a little bit of petrol. I might get talking about that hang time and warmer climates. This is certainly a Riesling that is made in a slightly warmer climate. So therefore that hang time will certainly be shorter. We've spoken for a few weeks on the 3 different ways in which a grape ripens. The sugar increases as the grape gets riper. The flavour and complexity of flavors increases as well. So starting off being very, very underripe, pithy lemon, and then ripening all the way through for white grape varieties, all the way through to your tropical mango, passion fruit, banana. And Riesling sort of sits really nicely in Tasmania at this ripe lemon cordial. I like orange and lime pith as well. It's especially on the nose. I get, if you ever have a PVC slicky slide, and when you unbox that for the first time, that's often an aroma I get. It's certainly interesting and only works when you have this abundant amount of ripe lime fruit as well. So taste it on the palate. It's still very dry, so this is the often the misconception with Riesling is a lot of people think, is Riesling always sweet? And there's a couple of reasons why people might think that. It's one, there was a lot of inexpensive Rieslings produced, which would be mass cropped, very uncomplex, and very, very sweet. And they were the wines that might be found on supermarket shelves and inexpensive. So Riesling being always sweet was only the reasons that you might be able to find. But the other reason is it ripens in terms of its phenolic and flavor ripeness quite quickly. So you end up with a very ripe, sweet lime cordial nose, which, although it smells sweet, it's impossible to smell sugar. So sugar is, if you dissolve sugar in water and you smell it, it doesn't really smell of anything. But what we can smell is the precursors to sweetness. Is we're trained as animals who want to forage for ripe berries that are going to give us sustenance, give us carbohydrates to keep us going. And in order for those berries to let us know that they're full of sugar, they give off this fantastic sweet aroma, and that's what makes them attractive to us. And the same happens with wine. Karen, good. Yes, it's a good comment on a German wine where there was added sugar after the wine was fermented, which led to even more imbalance and just this big, sickly, sweet dollop of sugar sitting on your front palate with very little complexity or acid to balance that. So as you can see, I think very, very different to the Mosel Riesling. It's almost worth going to look back at it as well to compare the two. It still has that vibrant acidity, and it's still a very mouth-coating texture, but the ripeness of the fruit is a little bit more on the limey, very, very ripe spectrum. And this is fermented 100% in stainless steel, very different to the large oak barrels that Ernie was speaking about sitting on its lees. This will be racked off its lees very, very quickly and protected from any of that textural component or any of the micro oxidation that gives the first wine its texture. So here they're trying to focus on very, very primary fruit, ripe lime, and so that's starting to go into white peach and maybe a little bit of apricot. So, does anyone have any questions on Tasmania and the first wine before we move on to meet Maynard? So, Freddie, good question. What are the other big Riesling? Riesling regions of the world? So, the only place in France where Riesling is allowed to be in regional wines is Alsace. Also grown, as Ernie said, in Washington, New York, and the Finger Lakes. Some fantastic Rieslings in New Zealand. Clare and the Eden Valley in Australia, as well as, of course, Tasmania. Some fantastic, lots of different styles coming out of Tasmania, some off-dry styles, and I'm sure I've forgotten some more. There's also, of course, Austria, Hungary, Switzerland will make some, also in Chile. Yeah, so I was getting there, guys. Brilliant. So without any more, we shall move on to meet Maynard. So Maynard is a Dutch winemaker who's found himself in Chile making wine in a fantastic family-run estate in Casablanca. Evening, Maynard.
Hi, good evening. nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for stepping in at such short notice. That's excellent.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Plus, we're still in working hours now, so
yeah. Well, so are we. So Maynard, tell us how you ended up in Casablanca. Incredible stories, really. So.
Well, that's a good question. I'm the first winemaker in my family to start with. I'm Dutch, as you might guess from my accent. Probably a bit similar to Ernie Lozens, but a bit more Dutch in my case. I've been living in Chile for 25 years now, so I'm almost more Chilean than Dutch by now, even though I still have the passport and the accent. And then I wanted to become a winemaker, which was a bit of an odd choice for a Dutch guy living in Chile.
Because Holland is not very winemaking. It's not very conducive to winemaking, is it? It's quite flat
Not
and
yet.
wet.
We do consume a lot in Holland.
Yeah.
We actually consume more in Holland than in Chile, so that's good. It's always good to be on the consumer side as well.
Fantastic. And so, talk about the grape varieties that you grow in Casablanca for Casas del Bosque.
Well, Casablanca, of course, it's much younger. It's not like the Mosel where they've been growing Riesling for more than 200 years. Casablanca has only been existing for some 35 years now, since the early 90s. So everything is different here, and we're still learning and finding out, which makes it so exciting to be able to work here as well. Since I'm the first winemaker in my family and working in a new area in a country with fairly few rules, gives a tremendous amount of freedom. and that's just fantastic, so you can do a bit more. We grow mostly Sauvignon Blanc. When Casablanca started out as a valley, it was mostly Chardonnay. But we have very sandy soils, and sandy soils are good for Chardonnay, but our Chardonnay was ungrafted, so it suffered a lot in these sandy soils. And Sauvignon Blanc was probably an easier replacement, as it's much more vigorous, and it does really, really well in these sandy soils. Gives you slightly lighter wines than most of the New World Sauvignons that you can taste. Riesling, oddly enough, does well in sandy soils as well, so that's good. And then if you go slightly higher up the slopes, you get more clay soil, which are perfect for Pinot Noir and even Syrah if you go high enough to escape the fog line a little. So
should we'll get everyone to open up their third wine, which is the Casas del Bosque, which is where Meinhard is the winemaker. So this is their late harvest Riesling. So we'll talk a little bit about how late harvest affects the style of the wine, and perhaps even touch on Botrytis.
Touch on Botrytis.
So, but maybe we'll do that in a bit. But if you want to explain how the difficulties of growing Riesling in Casablanca, because I know there's a little bit of where you get Botrytis, there's pressure from other diseases as well as climatic changes as well.
Yes, well, the climatic change, we suffer it in the entire world. First, on late harvest, it's not necessarily the latest harvest that you can imagine. It's normally you need shriveled grapes, and by the end of the harvest, the grapes are more shriveled. In our case, it's actually a bit easier because we have a lot of morning fog, which is good for the development of Botrytis. Botrytis is basically grey rot. It makes the grapes go soft and mushy and earthy as well. And then they fall off the vine if you're lucky. If you're not, then they're harvested and they end up in your wine. But in our case, fortunately, we have a lot of sun and wind in the afternoon, so you just get the beginning of a little rut, and then the grape dries up and shrivels, and that happens in 1, maximum 2 days. So it goes very quickly, and once you have a nice dry bunch, you can harvest it for late harvest. And sometimes it's actually harvested before the early harvest dry Riesling.
Wow, really? Is that just so? Is there a particular?
Is everything
part
upside down here in the the southern hemisphere?
So, is there a particular part of the vineyard then that gets this healthy Botrytis, whilst the rest of the vineyard remains very, very healthy fruit?
It's dry Botrytis is actually fantastic to have, and even if in a Chardonnay or a Sauvignon Blanc, it definitely can have a role. Riesling is much more prone to it. The skin is much thinner, so it's very easy for Riesling to get Botrytis, and especially in countries like Germany where it's very cold and it's difficult to ripen them. To get a few raisin berries increases your sugar levels a bit, so it increases your alcohol conveniently a bit as well. After all, we want some alcohol in our wines.
So I think I might just I think I might just summarize Botrytis and Noble Rot because I've just seen a couple of questions. So I'll try my best. Botrytis cinerea is one of the great molds in food production. We have the mold that you might make your blue Stilton out of, or you might have a mold that you produce penicillin out of. It's a part of the fungi family that is attracted to certain grapes, which occurs when the grapes get moist. And what this mold does is allow the escape of water from the grape, but not much else. So as water escapes, so if you're lucky, yeah. So the healthy Botrytis, which is what we're talking about, that you need to make this wine, just allows the escape of water from your grapes, and the acidity, therefore, and the sugar, therefore, both are very, very concentrated within that grape. So when you pick it and ferment it and perhaps even macerate it on its skins, it increases this fantastic complexity. And so often the tasting note would be things like honey, honeysuckle, ginger, beeswax. And as that ages, like this wine is, we've been drinking the 2015 at the moment, Maya. So you might even get some sort of savory, mushroomy soy sauce notes once this ages. And actually, wines like this can age for years and years and years. Yeah,
decades. Yes, the sugar is an antioxidant as well. Don't tell people this. And it makes the wine age for ages. I'm not sure if it's a good antioxidant for the human body, but I think it is. So
it seems counterintuitive for the human body. I think too much sugar increases oxidation in the human body.
Probably not really good for you, but still.
No. So as Karen said, is fantastic richness, flavor profile. So other great wines of the world that have this Noble Rot or Botrytis would be Sauterne or Tokai, and of course Germany. And so I was reading the tech sheet for this wine earlier, and it mentions berry selection. Yeah. And that's the same as Beeren Auslese in Germany. So berry selection, 2 words in the English language, 1 word. Well, actually, it's kind of berry selected, taken out, which is all into 1 word as Beeren Auslese in Germany.
Yeah. Trockenbeeren Auslese, a selection of dried berries.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all 1 word. Great.
Yeah.
So
what
would you pair this with? Yeah. What would you pair this with? What would you? Well,
you just mentioned it, Stilton.
Yeah.
I'd say
the mold with the mold.
Yes. Pair mold with mold. I mean, it's an easy one.
Yeah. But I think rich cheeses are. Yeah.
Slightly
and actually, I don't. Acidic brie, yeah, and. I don't think it's often a mistake. A lot of people match dessert wines with desserts that they don't necessarily go with, because sweet desserts and sweet wines kind of they kind of clash. So with something like this, you might want like a light apple tart that is not too sweet, because you want you don't want things that are too sweet to match with too sweet. I just saw someone wrote foie gras, and this would go fantastic well as well. The richness of the foie gras, the meatiness, and also that honeyed apricot drizzle is very, very delicious.
Yes, I normally don't have foie gras for dessert, but I'll give it a try.
No, but if you're just a Sunday afternoon snack.
Why not? And then you can keep drinking on the wine for dessert. And the wine is dessert as well. Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing is treating the dessert wine as the dessert is always a nice thing.
Yes, I personally rather have a champagne for dessert, because it refreshes with all the sweetness in the pudding.
That's a very, very good idea. So this is a great question. How long does Riesling age for? It's a incredible question, because I would say it's probably one of the as well as Chenin Blanc, probably the longest could be one of the longest standing grape varieties, with that huge acid, huge acid line. Could have lots of sugar. So high acid and high sugar would last for forever.
If the cork doesn't dry out.
Keep it on its side and the cork doesn't dry out. Brilliant. So what's on the agenda for the rest of the? Very good. So is everything from this vintage all in tank, done, fermenting? Oh no, I think we've lost Maynard, or maybe I have. Again, so I think. Oh, sorry, we lost you for a bit there. Oh, I lost you for a bit. Sorry. Okay, Maynard, thank you so much. I think we're having a little bit of connection issues, but there we go.
Oh dear.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to. I think it's. I don't know whether it's mine or. Oh, there we go. We're back again. Very good. Sorry, Russ. I think I'm sorry, Maynard. I think we had a bit of connection issues. I'm not sure whether it was just me or it was for everyone. So, if you have got any questions from any of the wines, it'd be really interesting to hear. Also, it's really interesting once you've tasted a really, really sweet wine like this. If you thought that either of the other two were perhaps also a bit sweet, it's really interesting to go back to them now in the other direction. I wouldn't recommend it in terms of enjoying the other two wines, but so if you have a sip of the Casas del Bosque late harvest, and then if you thought perhaps the Devil's Corner still had a little bit of sweetness that you thought, it's still a little bit sweet for me, go back to it. It tastes incredibly austere, very, very dry, and it's lost all its flavor. And it kind of shows the importance of tasting wine in the right order, or even food and wine. So if you were drinking something very sweet, or eating something very sweet, and then you were drinking something with a very, very high acid and no actual sweetness or sugar in it, despite the fact that it has a nice phenolic sweetness to it, it would ruin the wine, and it makes the wine seem tart, horrible, and sour. And it's not the wine's fault. It's the mix of the food and the wine going together, and it's a really good sort of indicator as to what you might pair one thing with the other. Yes, someone said the Tasmanian one is now tasteless. It does exactly that. If you go back from sweet back to dry, it's very, very puckering. And I've spoken a little bit about food matching and the sort of rule of thumb, and white wine and fish is always a go-to. But if you're serving tomato with that fish, the white wine can often clash really quite intensely. So see, George with the bit. So, Freddie, the best thing to do is to eat a bit of cheese. So there's a little thing in the wine trade that is a bit of an adage, whether it's true or not. It's always, if you're buying, you should be eating apple, because apple cleans your palate, ready for a new sensation. And if you're selling, you should be serving cheese, because it dulls your palate and allows everything, all the imbalances to disappear. So it's a bit of a tricky one, because tasting something sweet, but if you did have a bit of cheese, it might clean your palate a little bit, and then you can come back to the more fresher styles, because they then have to cut through the fat and creaminess of that cheese. Which one of the three is my favorite? This is a difficult question, because they're all such different styles, and they all, especially the late harvest and the red slate, are polar opposites. If you were eating foie gras and cheese, I'd love to be drinking the late harvest. And if you're having a maybe a Thai som tam salad, something like that, the either of those two would be fantastic. So there's Riesling. Where's the best place to get Riesling in the UK? I've always said the best place to get wine in the UK is independent wine merchants. Go and have a little chat with them. It's not only is it nice to have a conversation with someone about products that they are always so excited and passionate about, but they also get to learn your flavor, the flavors that you like, and then point you in the right direction. Happy birthday, Nicole! Yeah, of course, you can always wish people happy birthday. Let's take a couple more questions before we go. Sorry, it's quite tricky to read the comments and do the questions all at the same time. So we were talking about why does Riesling get a bad name, and George, it's funny that your mother would mention something like this. It's Hock refers to wine that was produced in Hockenheim region, and it got shortened to Hock. And it's this, as someone pointed out, the wine that is overcropped Riesling that tastes very, very indescript, has no complexity. We always talk about the quality of wine having four main pillars, and it's balance, length, intensity, and complexity. So balance is it a table and can you sit at it without it wobbling? Length is, can you taste it for a long period of time? Intensity is it very loud? And oh, sorry, mother-in-law, Alison, I apologize. Sarah, it is Hock. So length is how can you taste for a long period of time. Intensity is how loud does it shout on your palate, and complexity is how nuanced and how many different flavors can you taste. So I always like to use the analogy: hugely intense wine, but not very complex. It's a bit like a trumpet blowing in your face. It might be enjoyable. It might be a really good tune, but it's not very complex. And it might be it's not very complex, but it's incredibly intense. Or you might get a wine that is incredibly complex, like a symphonic orchestra. Symphonic, I always get that word wrong. Or like a big orchestra with 200 instruments, but they're playing very, very delicately. And that's a hugely complex wine, but because they're playing delicately, it's not very intense, but the length also might be there. So they're the four pillars of wine. Hock and Riesling that was inexpensive would have been incredibly intense. It would be very, very one-dimensional. It would be incredibly unbalanced, because what happens is they pick the grapes incredibly early. They haven't ripened to their full potential. They then added sugar once it's fermented, and to try and balance out this the high acid and the high sugar, and it just doesn't really work. And you can tell when a wine like that has been adulterated, and it's just there to please some commerciality. Fantastic. Let's have a couple more questions. They'll keep popping up. Thanks, everyone. Let's see. Sorry. How long can you keep this? As Mina said, the sugar is a antioxidant, and because this has got about 300 grams per litre of sugar in it, so don't drink too much, 3 times as sweet as Coca-Cola. It would probably last a week if you put a cork in it, put it in the fridge. It would be fantastic for a week. It might even develop a little bit. So someone said, did any of these wines have sugar added? None of these wines have sugar added at all. All of these wines are 100% from the fruit. So all the sugar, every single component of these wines will come from the fruit themselves, including the red slate, which is fermented with indigenous yeast, wild yeast that are in the vineyards, a little bit like your sourdough versus your little packet of dried yeast to making bread. an indigenous yeast comes from the vineyard and in the cellar, and the little packaged yeast comes and it will really give you the flavors that you want, and very, very reliable. And that's the difference. So thank you all again so much for watching. Now week 10 on Sunday, I'm tasting with 6 South African winemakers for a great initiative to support the South African wine trade called the Great British Braai-Off. If you don't know what a braai is, it's a big South African barbecue. It's a way of life. So I'll be braaiing on Sunday with 6 South African winemakers. They'll be in South Africa. I'll be in my back garden. We're tasting 6 wines together, all cooking a course for each of the wines. So could be quite a bit of a car crash watching. And next week we're doing light French reds. So hopefully see you, as many of you then as possible, and have a great bank holiday. Cheers, everyone.